Marie Petit. Her name is whispered in historical chronicles, often shrouded in romantic myths of a femme fatale, a courtesan forced to live in a gilded cage. But discard the thin veil of popular fiction, and a vastly different figure emerges. She was born into a family where wealth was an elusive dream, and social standing an unattainable luxury. Young, ambitious, with a sharp mind and striking beauty, Marie Petit quickly realized that the traditional path to success was closed to her. Instead of accepting her predetermined fate, she gambled on her sole capital, herself. Maria didn't merely sell favors, she sold access, intrigue, and secrets, becoming not just a courtesan, but a valuable informant, a virtuosic negotiator, and at times, a ruthless puppeteer behind the scenes of grand politics. Her salons swiftly transformed into centers of clandestine power, where kings and ministers, generals and spies divulged their most intimate secrets, firmly believing they were speaking with a woman of loose morals. Thus, from an obscure provincial girl, Marie Petit became one of the most influential women of her time. Her influence extended from monarchs' bedrooms to ministerial offices, from secret societies to diplomatic missions. She was not merely a lover, but an unofficial advisor, a spy, and even an architect of international scandals, skillfully exploiting the weaknesses of the powerful. According to contemporaries, her hands were behind several major political upheavals and grand schemes that radically redrew the map of Europe. She didn't just observe history, she wrote it, using the bed as a battlefield and whispers as a weapon of mass destruction. Forget the notion that Marie Petit was merely a victim of circumstance or a naive beauty fallen prey to male debauchery. This is not a story of a fallen woman. It is the chronicle of a cold-blooded strategist who built her empire on vices and secrets, and whose legacy still sends shivers down the spines of those who dare to look beyond the facade of a glamorous life. But before her name was whispered in royal bedrooms and diplomatic cabinets, Marie Petit was just one of thousands of unknown girls, destined to languish in the shadow of big cities. Her childhood, devoid of any luxury, was permeated by the acrid smell of poverty and a constant struggle for survival. She saw dreams shatter against the granite of social hierarchy, how doors closed to those not born with a silver spoon in their mouth. From an early age, a harsh reality was etched into her eyes. The world was not fair, and nobility brought neither bread nor respect. The Petit family barely made ends meet, clinging to every opportunity to avoid complete ruin. Maria observed the daily humiliations her parents endured, their desperate attempts to maintain some dignity amidst constant need. These scenes didn't just shape her character, they carved a deep, indelible wound into her consciousness. She learned the primary lesson of survival. One could only rely on oneself, and weakness was a death sentence. Unlike many of her peers who dreamed of a saving marriage or a modest existence, Maria harbored no illusions. She knew too well the price of honest poverty and had no desire to repeat the fate of her ancestors. Her sharp mind, bolstered by phenomenal observational skills, allowed her to grasp the true nature of power early on. She saw that beneath the ostentatious glitter of the aristocracy lay the same human vices, the same weaknesses and fears, as among commoners. The difference lay only in scale and consequences. The rich and noble, despite their privileges, remained puppets of their passions. It was in this insight that Maria's future strength lay. She understood if traditional paths were closed, she had to create her own. The point of no return didn't arrive in a single moment, but was the culmination of a series of bitter realizations. Perhaps it happened when her family was denied help despite desperate pleas, or when she witnessed the hypocrisy and cruelty of those who possessed power but lacked conscience. Each such episode solidified her conviction that moral principles were a luxury that a survivor could not afford. Human feelings were not alien to her, but she learned to suppress them, transforming emotional pain into cold calculation. It was then, at a young age, that Marie Petit made her first, yet most crucial strategic move. She decided not to be a victim. She refused the role of a passive observer accepting fate's blows. Her beauty, previously perceived as a simple given, now became a tool. Her intellect, which could have led her to a modest career as a governess or teacher, was redirected to studying human psychology and the mechanisms of influence. She began to analyze how people interact, what strings pulled their puppet-like lives, how to use others' desires and fears for her own ends. This was the birth not just of a courtesan, but of an analyst who viewed the world as a complex chessboard, where each person was a piece, and each desire a potential lever. Marie Petit didn't just survive, she built her own coordinate system, where a person's value was determined by their usefulness, and morality was merely a convention. Her subsequent actions, however shocking they might seem, were merely the logical development of this initial ruthless philosophy, forged in the crucible of poverty and humiliation. She became the embodiment of the idea that despair can be the most powerful catalyst for forging an unprecedented will. But even the most unprecedented will needs fertile ground to grow, and Europe of that era was not just ground. It was a bubbling cauldron of intrigue, ambition, and despair, an ideal environment for the rise of those who dared to play by their own rules. The late 17th and early 18th centuries marked an era of unprecedented turbulence. Continental powers, torn apart by dynastic wars and territorial claims, lived in a state of constant, barely contained confrontation. From Versailles to Vienna, from London to St. Petersburg, monarchs battled for hegemony, forming and dissolving alliances with dizzying speed. Diplomacy of that time was not so much the art of open negotiations as a secret war of spies, bribes, and blackmail. Secret messages were intercepted, rulers' personal weaknesses became bargaining chips, and state secrets were sold for hard cash. In this labyrinth of lies and betrayal, official institutions often proved too slow or too unwieldy to effectively manage the flow of information. There was a desperate need for informal channels, for people capable of penetrating behind closed doors, learning what was not meant for foreign ears, and influencing events while remaining in the shadows. The economic backdrop added even more chaos and opportunity to this picture. The flourishing of mercantilism and colonial empires generated incredible wealth, but this wealth was concentrated in the hands of a select few, leaving the vast majority of the population in poverty. Financial speculation, grand bubbles, and sudden bankruptcies were commonplace, capable of elevating or ruining entire fortunes overnight. In this world, where money and connections meant more than origin, old aristocratic families gradually gave way to a new elite, parvenus, bankers, businessmen, hungry for power and recognition. They were willing to pay any price for information, for influence, for the ability to manipulate markets or political decisions to their advantage. The social atmosphere was permeated with hypocrisy. A shadow of moral laxity and double standards fell upon the ostentatious glitter of courts and salons. Society, strictly divided into estates, was nonetheless permeated by informal connections. Salons of noble ladies and secret societies became centers where aristocrats and intellectuals, artists and adventurers mixed, and the boundaries between the permissible and the forbidden blurred. It was here, far from stiff ceremonies and official receptions, that true coalitions were formed, deals were struck, and intrigues were woven, capable of changing the course of history. Women deprived of formal political power could gain colossal influence by using their wit, charm, and access to the highest-ranking figures. Thus, Europe of that time was not merely a collection of states and peoples, it was a complex, multi-layered mechanism driven by greed, fear, and ambition. the despair of the lower classes, the corruption of the higher, the insatiable thirst for power and wealth. All this created a perfect storm in which traditional rules of the game collapsed, opening the way for those who were bold, intelligent, and ruthless enough to use this chaos for their own ends. For a figure like Marie Petit, this world was not an obstacle, but a boundless field of opportunities, where every weakness of the powerful became a potential leverage point. The world indeed proved to be a boundless field of opportunities, and Marie Petit wasted no time cultivating it. Her first steps on this minefield were cautious, but each was calculated with surgical precision. She didn't plunge headfirst into the abyss, but methodically built a network where information and influence became the primary currency. Her salons, not yet centers of European intrigue, were already beginning to attract those who sought not just entertainment, but solutions to their pressing problems. Financial, political, personal. One such petitioner, Comte de Valois, whose lands were mortgaged and reputation hung by a thread due to failed investments, became her first major project. The Comte, in despair, sought any opportunity to avoid disgrace. He came to Maria not as a lover, but as a last hope, having heard of her extraordinary perceptiveness and connections. Maria, instead of offering him banal favors, offered information. She discovered that an influential minister, responsible for trade, was preparing to implement a reform that would drastically change import duties on certain colonial goods, specifically tobacco and sugar. This reform could either ruin or elevate those who invested in it. Maria didn't just relay this information to the Comte. She conducted a deep market analysis for him, identifying key players who would win or lose. She introduced him to one of her new acquaintances, an ambitious young banker who was seeking opportunities for large investments. Under her unspoken guidance, Comte de Valois, using his last funds, bet on the right goods, and the banker, trusting Maria's intuition, provided the necessary credits. When the reform was announced, the Comte not only paid off his debts, but tripled his fortune, and the banker gained enormous profit, solidifying his position in the financial world. This incident, though not reported in newspapers, quickly spread through the exclusive circles of Parisian society. Maria gained no direct financial benefit, but acquired something far more valuable, a reputation as someone who could foresee the future, and two influential debtors ready to do anything for her favor. She proved that her value was measured not by her beauty, but by the accuracy of her calculations and the extensiveness of her network. Just 2 years later, her name was whispered not only in salons, but also in the corridors of power. It was time for a bolder game. The early 18th century was marked by a fever of financial speculation, and France was no exception. The government, desperately in need of funds, launched a grandiose project, the creation of the Royal Indian Company, which was supposed to manage trade with the colonies and, by design, solve all the country's financial problems. The company's shares soared, fueled by rumors of the immense wealth it would bring. Thousands of people, from aristocrats to shopkeepers, invested their last savings, hoping for quick enrichment. Marie Petit, observing this madness, saw not an economic boom, but a huge, inflating bubble. She understood that this pyramid would sooner or later collapse. Her goal was not to stop it, but to use this collapse to her advantage. Her salons became a place where not only investors gathered, but also those who possessed real information, ship captains returning from the colonies with disheartening news about the true state of affairs, officials who knew the extent of corruption within the company, and even engineers who understood that the declared resource extraction projects were nothing more than fiction. Maria methodically collected these fragments of truth, comparing them with official statements and rumors. She did not spread panic directly. That would have been too risky. Instead, she began to use more subtle methods. At her receptions, she arranged discussions where skeptical remarks accidentally leaked, supported by unofficial data. She subtly brought together the right people who could confirm her fears, without them realizing they were being used. Most importantly, she began to selectively, through her most trusted and influential clients, give advice about the need to diversify assets, sell some shares, or even completely exit the game while prices were still high. While crowds were still storming the stock exchanges, Maria and her chosen circle quietly withdrew their capital. When the bubble burst and the shares of the Royal Indian Company turned into worthless paper, causing a wave of bankruptcies across Europe, Marie Petit not only preserved her fortune, but multiplied it by profiting from those who followed her advice and then entrusted her with managing their remaining assets. She didn't just predict the disaster, she masterfully exploited it, proving that chaos holds the greatest opportunities for those who can see one step ahead. These initial yet audacious manipulations by Marie Petit laid the foundation for her further ascent. They showed that she was not just a beautiful woman with useful connections, but a cold-blooded player capable of analyzing complex economic and political processes, foreseeing their consequences, and using them for her own ends. Her methods were far from traditional morality, but in a world dominated by greed and hypocrisy, they proved incredibly effective. She didn't just survive, she thrived, turning others' illusions and fears into steps of her own invisible empire. Behind the seeming ease of her first triumphs lay not just luck or favorable circumstances, but a masterful command of human engineering. Marie Petit didn't just observe people, she dissected them, breaking them down into their components, ambitions, fears, weaknesses, secret desires. Everyone who crossed the threshold of her salon became the object of intense, ruthless analysis, resulting in a precise psychological profile. Her charisma extended far beyond physical beauty. It was a complex, multifaceted phenomenon, based on a sharp mind capable of sustaining conversation on any, even the most complex topic, from philosophy and high art to stock market quotes and colonial policy. Maria possessed phenomenal empathy, allowing her to grasp unspoken desires, hidden pains, and even the most subtle nuances of her interlocutor's mood. She didn't flatter directly or resort to primitive seduction. Instead, she created in a person the feeling that they themselves were revealing their deepest thoughts and secrets to her, thereby becoming even more significant in their own eyes. This was not a game of easy wins, but a subtle, almost imperceptible manipulation of self-esteem, turning her interlocutors into loyal allies and sometimes into unconscious pawns. Her understanding of human psychology allowed her to masterfully play on the most powerful motivators, greed and fear. The example with the Royal Indian Company perfectly demonstrates this approach. Maria didn't directly sell her clients the dream of wealth. She offered them something far more valuable, exclusive knowledge capable of guaranteeing that dream while protecting them from inevitable collapse. Her clients believed they were receiving not just insider information, but access to a secret order of the chosen who saw the truth behind the facade of ostentatious prosperity. This sense of belonging to something secret and surpassing ordinary understanding made her advice even more appealing and convincing. She gave them not just information, but seemed to hand them the key to solving their problems, making them dependent on her insight. Maria was not an omniscient oracle. Her genius lay in her ability to identify true experts and use them, often without their knowledge. She created her own invisible network of informants, which included ship captains returning from the colonies with real, often disheartening data, officials deeply immersed in the company's corruption schemes, and even engineers capable of soberly assessing the fictitiousness of the declared projects. Maria accidentally brought these people together at her receptions, allowing their disparate knowledge to coalesce into a coherent, alarming picture. She did not spread panic directly, but skillfully sowed seeds of doubt, using a method that today would be called information noise or a managed leak. She did not refute official rumors, but gave reason for the appearance and spread of alternative, trust-eroding versions. Her main weapon, besides intellect, was phenomenal adaptability. Maria could instantly switch between roles, from an attentive listener extracting secrets to a cold-blooded strategist giving precise instructions. She could be naive to lull vigilance or formidable to compel action. This flexibility allowed her not only to survive in a world where rules changed faster than fashion, but also to thrive, constantly adjusting her approach depending on the interlocutor's personality and the current situation. She did not stick to one tactic, but constantly analyzed reactions, learning from every interaction. Her life was a continuous process of learning and self-improvement, where every misstep became valuable experience and every victory a confirmation of the chosen path. She did not follow the beaten path, she forged her own, paved with others' secrets and her own ruthless will. Her path, paved with others' secrets, led Marie Petit to new, even more dangerous heights. In the 2 years following the collapse of the Indian Company, her network had grown to incredible proportions, encompassing not only Paris, but also key European capitals. Comte de Valois and the ambitious banker, who were the first beneficiaries of her foresight, became her most devoted supporters, opening doors to the most exclusive circles. Through them, Maria gained access to generals whose careers hung by a thread due to unsuccessful military campaigns, to disgraced diplomats eager to return to the grand game, to courtiers whose fortunes were rapidly dwindling. Each of them came to her in despair and left with a solution, not always realizing that they themselves were becoming part of her grand, invisible scheme. One such patron, Viscount de Montaigne, a former fleet commander whose reputation was destroyed after the loss of several ships in the Caribbean, became a key figure in her growing empire. Montaigne, who had extensive connections in naval circles and the colonies but was unable to use them, was an ideal target. Maria not only restored his good name by providing incriminating evidence against his detractors and proof of sabotage, but also reinstated him at court, making him an unofficial informant on the state of the fleet and trade routes. In return, Montaigne granted her access to secret dispatches, maps, and even plans for military operations, which gave Maria an invaluable advantage in a world where information was more precious than gold. But the higher Maria rose, the more enemies she made. Her informal influence, her ability to manipulate financial markets and political decisions began to irritate those who, by birthright, considered themselves the sole masters of their position. The main antagonist, whose shadow loomed over her ascent, was the powerful Marquis de Lafontaine, the Minister of Finance, an old-school man whose power rested on centuries-old traditions and an unwavering belief in his own infallibility. Lafontaine, arrogant and cruel, saw Maria not just as an upstart, but as a threat to the very foundation of his world. He despised her for her low birth and hated her for daring, as a mere courtesan, to interfere in matters that, in his opinion, were exclusively the prerogative of the aristocracy. The conflict between them was inevitable. Lafontaine, being the architect of many financial schemes, including those that led to the collapse of the Indian Company, could not forgive Maria her success amidst his own failures. He considered her actions not just an audacity, but a direct challenge to his authority. His anger was further fueled by the fact that several of his own carefully planned financial operations had failed, and assets had ended up in the hands of people connected to Maria. He could not directly prove her involvement, but felt her invisible hand behind every one of his setbacks. Lafontaine began to use his extensive connections in the police and courts to find compromising information on Maria. He spread rumors about her ties to foreign powers, accusing her of espionage and treason. His goal was not merely to discredit her, but to destroy her, strip her of her influence, and possibly her life. He believed that by crushing this arrogant courtesan, he would restore order and strengthen his faltering power. The story of their confrontation became a secret, invisible war, where every move was calculated and the price of error was unimaginably high. Lafontaine, accustomed to open combat and direct confrontation, did not understand that Marie Petit played by different rules. She did not fight on the battlefield, but entangled her enemies with invisible threads, turning their own weaknesses into instruments of their downfall.